began to happen in Britain through the 60s, through the 70s and through the 80s is that people began to stand up against racism. And they began to insist that you saw black and Asian, for instance, you know, I work in the theatre and I work in movies, so you saw black and Asian people on TV. That you began to study texts by writers who were not only English men. And the whole discourse of political correctness started to happen. And that this was also a time when people who were women began to argue for their rights too, and began to say, actually, we're here too, you know. And gay people also began to stand up and say, we're here as well, you know. So the whole discourse in the 70s and 80s began to split open. And people began to insist on their right to exist, on their identity, and on their place in society. And they began to say that gay people have a history too, women have a history. Asian people have been in Britain since the 16th century. So gradually people began to see that they are not only victims, that they have a history that isn't to be suppressed, that they have a voice, they have an identity. And then we had something that developed which is called identity politics, when people began to say, you know, I'm this, I'm that, I'm the other, and this is my history, and I'm beginning to speak. And this is how then you begin to, as it were, fracture the identity of the bully, of the other who thinks that they are superior to you, etc. I mean, when I was a kid, and if you were an Englishman and you were an Indian, I was very aware of this in my father, that people really believed that Indians were inferior to English people. They just thought they were. You know, that there'd be this empire, and if you were an Indian, you were much less intelligent than an English person. You were worth less, and you should be sweeping the street. People really believed that. I don't even think they were particularly bad people. That was just a habit. You know, it was like a national habit that you had to break. You know, this was a cliche. These were ideas that people had about you. And one of the things that breaks up these ideas is literature, is culture. It's not the only thing, but it's an important step, you know. And one of the things that happened in the 80s was that Salman Rushdie's novel Midnight's Children was published. And then we began to get a real rush of works from kids like me, and later on from Zadie Smith and Monica Ali, and, you know, all the books now are written by Indians. And, you know, Slumdog Millionaire won an Oscar, which is a film based on a novel written by an Indian, etc. So, you know, once the door had been opened, there was a rush of people through it to speak and to write, and there were new voices, and we began to see that the world was much more complicated and plural than we had originally imagined it to be.